Now that we don't have proper toy stores anymore, like KB and Toys R Us, most toy purchases at retail are done through big box stores. And big box stores divide up their toy area or section by aisle, and each aisle tends to be themed. You have dolls, you have vehicles, you have toddler toys, you have action figures, board games, projectiles like Nerf, etc., etc. And then there's also sort of the odd man out, which is that collector wall behind electronics. Both Walmart and Target have this. It's where toys go that are aimed at the adult collector, and this area of the store has a different sales requirement than the aisle. The aisle is set up in what's called a planogram, and I've explained this on a couple of videos. It's basically a scientifically created display to maximize the number of sales and where everything can be measured by square footage. In other words, a big box retailer feels that every SKU in their entire store for every section needs to earn their keep, meaning they have to have a certain number of units per day sold. It's called sales velocity, and I can bring you through the whole formula to understand it, but this is not an MBA class or a class on accounting. Essentially, big box stores are set up to sell everyday items that have very high velocity. Items that get sold day in, day out, no matter what season, no matter what's going on. Things like toilet paper, or things like murder knives, things that we need to use over and over again on a weekly basis. So the toy aisle, well, why does it exist? Well, it's mostly there for presents, and I'm not talking about presents for your family, no matter how large or small that family might be, and how many birthdays you may have to celebrate. Because the toy aisle is really there not for your family and your children, but rather your children's classmates who have birthdays throughout the year. This is the main reason that people shop in the toy aisle, to buy gifts for their children's friends. Not for holidays, not for special occasions, not even for their own children's birthdays, because those only happen once a year. All right, so let's talk about Game of Thrones, which is maybe why you clicked on this video based on the thumbnail. We all remember Game of Thrones, right? It was this big action-adventure fantasy epic that was on HBO. It also had a very hit book series. And there was a time when Game of Thrones was everything in our culture. It was the coolest thing. If you weren't watching Game of Thrones, you weren't allowed by the water cooler at work. You were shunned entirely, because if you didn't know what was going on in Westeros, you didn't know what was going on. And it became a social phenomenon. It became things that people shared their reactions to and were shocked and surprised at all the twists and turns, unless, of course, obviously you read the books and you knew exactly what was coming. But let's just face it and call facts are facts. Most people don't read books these days, even though, they're really good. Okay, so beyond that, Game of Thrones obviously took a turn. In season 7 and 8, and more specifically season 8, the show lost a lot of its popularity. And yes, we all have those times when we drift and we kind of suddenly remember, oh yeah, season 8 of Game of Thrones. And why was this? Well, it didn't stick the landing. This is a term in gymnastics or Olympics, well, really gymnastics, where a great performance is made even greater by having a finale where you have a perfect landing. And season 8 was far from that, and the fans tended to turn against the show very quickly. And the show has faded much quicker than expected, especially for people who licensed the IP for toy product, or really any consumer product. There used to be Game of Thrones product everywhere. We were almost getting as much of it as we are getting Baby Yoda, in different play patterns, in different form factors. Even McFarlane, that signed up to be the master toy license for action figures, only put out a single wave, because after season 8, the popularity of the show waned pretty darn quick. And that was shocking, especially for how popular it was amongst the general public. It was almost like it never even existed at all. As they gear up to celebrate their Iron Anniversary, get it, because 10th year? All right, so let's go back in time, though. Let's go back to when Game of Thrones was incredibly popular in the mass public. Not just with, all of us toy nerds and, fanboys and fangirls out there, but was legitimately popular among the masses. Somewhere around season 5, right, when it really started getting huge as far as the general public, let's say. And obviously, this was when the show was hitting, all burning fires. And, well, that's kind of a pun in a pun. Let's not talk about that. But it's also when the toys started hitting, because there is a 3-year development. So the toys were probably licensed somewhere around season 2 and 3, which meant they were finally showing up around season 4 and 5. And some of the best figures out there were Funko's Legacy Collection. And yes, I know there were some quality control issues. My Jon Snow's hand fell off as well. But outside of that, these sort of should have been the Marvel Legends or the Star Wars Black series of Game of Thrones, right? For the serious adult collector. And even big box stores like Target were selling them in the main toy aisle with all the other kid product as well. They also had them in the collector aisle, but there were front-facing end caps, meaning not the clearance end cap, but the end cap that was facing out towards the main aisle with Game of Thrones figures on them. All right, so with that and with alternative retail, things like Barnes & Noble having custom displays created to sell the legacy figures right next to the books, why is it that these figures went away so quickly? It was like, poof, gone, right? Game of Thrones is hugely popular. These toys should be hugely popular. Marvel Legends is able to stay on aisle. Star Wars Black Series is. And yes, despite some quality control issues, the figures were pretty awesome. I mean, the sculpts were great. The articulation was great. And the masses at large, it was popular. The IP, Game of Thrones, this was the peak of the popularity. Well, one of the big reasons, obviously, is it is an R-rated show. Well, I mean, not literally, there's no R rating in TV shows, but it's an adult show, meaning the only people who know about it are the adult collectors, and there's not enough of us to support a line at retail. And to kind of illustrate this, let me turn to a little math, because relying on math is always a good way of doing this, because math doesn't lie, of course, except when it does. All right, so population of the United States, 328 million. And that's not counting chuds and not counting Morlocks and, all those other things. All right, so let's look at a film. Avengers Infinity War, right? And the number of tickets sales. So if you take the number of ticket sales divided by opening weekend for Avengers Infinity War, you find out that, so you've got the population, 328 million, divided by 28,000 that went to see it. That's 11%. 11% of the entire country went to go see Avengers Infinity War on opening weekend. I mean, obviously more of the country saw it later on, but those are the hardcore fanboys, right? Those are those of us that are, buying the action figures and et cetera, et cetera. And of even that 11%, how many are action figure fans? Not all of that 11%. Not everyone who went to go see these big movies on opening weekend is an action figure fan. That is exactly why the kid purchase is so important to keep a line in the retail aisle. Because kids, or rather gift givers who are buying for kids, are the vast majority of people who purchase toys. And when you have a property that's already an adult property, it doesn't set you up for success in the toy aisle. And that is why adult action figure lines, things like Game of Thrones, have a hard time at retail. There's just not enough of us. I hope this video clarified and gave some good examples. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below. Love a subscription and a bell ring and all of that stuff because it helps YouTube's algorithm to share this video more. Thanks for watching.